7% of Nebraska's corn was harvested as of Sunday. That open ground now gives crop and livestock producers another possible source for forages. We talked with Terry Klopfenstein this week about why crop farmers may actually benefit by removing residue. How much residue in a drought year like this is out there in the fields right now?
That's a good question on a drought year. On a normal year, with our 10 million acres of corn, we would expect to produce about 40 million tons of residue. That's a lot of residue. The corn plant produces about as much residue material above ground as it does grain. And so for every bushel, that's 56 pounds, well, we've got a roughly equivalent amount of residue left in the field. So that's a lot, 40 million tons. This year it will be less than that, maybe somewhat less on irrigated, but especially the rain-fed will be less than that.
And what are the uses that you can get out of it, even if it is lesser, especially on the dry land fields?
Well, all of our other forages are less this year too. So in Nebraska, the forage resource we have for the beef cattle industry is the corn residue. We're short on hay, we're short on pasture, and we're short on alfalfa. Now, it sounds like I'm suggesting we harvest all of the corn residue. That's not the case. If we used up what I think would be needed by the industry, we may be only talking about 3 or 4 million tons. And remember, I said on a normal year 40, I would guess this year we'll still produce at least 30, 35. So I'm talking about 10% maybe of the residue that would be needed to meet the needs of the cattle industry.
Let's talk about the crop producer then. The crop producer is probably wondering about the impacts for next year. So are there consequences to taking the residue off the field for corn on corn or beans on corn?
It's a good question. You used the word impact. That's the first thing when we talk about grazing. The first thing that comes to a crop producer's mind is what's the hoof impact, if you will. What's the effect on the soil? Am I going to have a compaction problem? That kind of a thing. Second would be erosion, probably either water or wind. Each situation is going to be a little bit different in terms of the impact for the corn producer.
And the impact is, or the data shows?
This surprises crop producers because in their mind they're thinking, oh, what happens if it decreases my yield? Okay, in this field we're doing a corn-soybean rotation, so that it's in soybeans the year after corn. The yield is statistically increased by 2 bushels per acre by grazing. And that's not a year, that's 16 years of data. It's really solid data. Corn the next year then, which gets grazed again, but the crop yield on that corn is increased by 3 bushels, not statistically different, but numerically it's higher, so that means we didn't decrease it, we just haven't picked up the increase at this point. That's surprising to most people. I'm on a mission on this because most people think, well, how much of a decrease am I going to get? Not whether I get a decrease, but how much? It's not that, okay? We've actually demonstrated an increase. Our colleagues at North Platte have the field at Brule, and they've only have 3 years of production data on that. No effect, okay? Quite a different environment, different soil, that kind of a thing. So we're pretty confident that grazing does not have a negative impact. It has, if anything, it's a positive impact.
Is there impacts from baling then?
They've baled at Brule and have not had an impact to this point. May take long term. Secondly, we've collaborated with our USDA scientist, Brian Weinhold, and previously Wally Wilhelm, that have been baling. Now they've been doing it for cellulosic ethanol purposes, but it doesn't matter. We prefer to have it go to the feedlot anyway. And so they've been doing this for 10 years, so they got 10 years of data long term, and in that 10 years of data, they've demonstrated that by taking off about 35 to 40% has had a dramatic increase in yields. What they tell me, I'm not the agronomist, but what they tell me is that with our increase in corn yields on irrigated corn, we're producing so much residue that it's impacting the subsequent yield. I'm describing a situation here where it's corn after corn, okay? And it's just too much residue. So taking some off, I mean, it was like 20 bushels per acre. Some people have gone to some tillage and some stalk shredding and so on. Our argument is that it's better to bale it and let the cattle industry have it, or graze it and let the cattle industry have it, than to do tillage or shredding or something like that. So the data would say the 10% that we want for the cattle industry, if anything, it's a plus for the corn industry.